Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
I'm Seth,
I'm Ariana.
and this is the Pop Cult Podcast, back again on my old laptop, finally repaired.
I know, without any of your help, listeners. Just kidding.
With
Did you do a plea or did you not? Yeah, I think
No
you
one
did.
ever helped me, yeah. No one ever helped me.
Just me.
Fair weather fuckers out there.
That's how you get listeners, by
Yeah,
insulting.
you motherfuckers. Give me money, goddammit.
Sign up to the Patreon, you little bitch.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll get the numbers to go up. So this episode, we will be reviewing what was essentially a Hail Mary movie when we couldn't get the movie we wanted. And so instead we watched Dogman, the movie. We'll be talking about that a little later. But first up, the recent Academy Award nominated film Nickel Boys. And we're recording this the day after the 2025 Oscars. Honora won a bunch of awards.
Good for Sean Baker.
Yeah, I feel very we've been watching Sean Baker since the Florida Project.
Cannot wait for his next Disney Plus.
Yeah, it's gonna be like a Star Wars series.
Yeah. Can't wait for him to be handed over the reins of like some show or movie that he has no interest in.
And Adrian Brody winning for The Brutalist, which we reviewed last week, I believe. Yeah. So we're going to be talking about Nickel Boys, which I do believe won Best Adapted Screenplay last night. The plot is Elwood Curtis's college dreams are shattered when he's sentenced to Nickel Academy, a brutal reformatory in the Jim Crow South. Clinging to his optimistic worldview, Elwood strikes up a friendship with Turner, a fellow black teen who dispenses fundamental tips for survival. And it's based on the novel of the same name by Colson Whitehead, who I have read one of his books, The Colossus of New York, back when I was in undergrad. It was a long time ago. I have not read any of his other books, but we did see Barry Jenkins' adaptation of The Underground Railroad that was on Amazon Prime.
Oh, I read Underground Railroad.
And you did? Okay.
Yeah.
And so this is based on a true... I wouldn't say these characters necessarily are real, but it's based on a real thing that used to exist. Mm-hmm. These sort of a continuation of slavery, post-slavery, quote unquote, of work camps for juvenile delinquents who basically stepped out of line once and were thrown into places like this. The big gimmick of this movie is that it is shot in first-person perspective and jumps between Elwood and Turner's characters. And so a lot of our conversation, I think, is probably going to be about that fact, because that is the sort of the dominant discourse around this movie is about the way it's shot. What did you think generally about Nickel Boys?
Nickel Boys is one of those films that I wish I liked it more than I do. I got bored midway to
What
it.
is 2 hours and 20 minutes, which I think is way too long. I don't think it needed to be that long.
Because at first I was like, oh, this is like Barry Jenkins meets Terrence Malick, like with the with some of the imagery as we're going through basically Elwood's life.
Was one of the
things, it's like quick sequences, right?
One of the things I liked was there was a texture to this movie. The shots that the film chose to linger on often, there was a definite feel to things.
Yeah.
Like you could kind of feel when things were humid and sweaty. Mm-hmm. Whenever, somebody was running fabric through their hand, you really could feel it through the way it was shot.
Yeah, or like the fear that Elwood would carry about what had happened, basically, that his mother, after having left him, and how he would check on his grandmother. Mm-hmm. Like, you could feel that loneliness combined of, like, being a child to some degree. But then, as we start pinpointing the point before he gets to the Nickel Academy, it starts to lose me. Because it's... Honestly, they've made him, like, this ideal...
Model minority.
Right?
Yeah.
He's going to the protests. Oh, Elwood always has his nose in a book. Like he never watches television.
Now, the thing I'm wondering though is, was Turner supposed to be like a bad boy? Because I thought if Turner had been more of a criminal type, it would have created an interesting juxtaposition, right? But even Turner felt very sanitized.
I think it was also just the mix of the delivery, right? It felt, and we were marking this like the acting was a little too close what I would call WB slash Disney acting. Like it's if Turner was a bad boy, because I came with the conclusion from the movie that this is not the first time that Turner has been in a place like the Nickel
Well,
Academy.
there's that one shot where he's sitting in a train car and it's like a time lapse.
Yeah.
And the idea that he's this kid who kind of, there's no one there for him. He's just out in the world traveling, just trying to survive.
Hmm.
Again, I don't think the film did a great job of communicating that fully. And I think that's my biggest problem with the film is at the end of these 2 hours and 20 minutes, I still didn't really care specifically about Turner and Elwood as characters.
Yeah.
The situation and the circumstances and all of those things, I felt, oh wow, this is like a horrific thing. But because I couldn't get emotionally invested in those characters, I felt the impact of the ending just failed to hit in the way I think they intended it to. Now I see very different takes. I see there's a large contingent of people who were like I was bawling my eyes out at the end of the movie. And so I'm not really sure what they got that I missed. And I think some of it has to do with like the people who are making the movie. It was directed by Ramel Ross, who also co-wrote the script with his producer. And Ramel Ross has previously made a documentary that I've been very keen to see at some point, and I think I have it scheduled sometime for this year. Hale County This Morning, This Evening, where he shoots, I think it's Hale County, Indiana, and it's just kind of a cinema verite.
Hmm.
And from what I've read about Ramel Ross, he was very inspired by Frederick Wiseman's documentaries, who I absolutely love Frederick Wiseman. And so this is Ramel's Ross's first narrative feature. And I immediately, when the end credits on this started rolling, I thought of, I think it was Joshua Oppenheimer's first narrative feature we watched a few weeks ago, The End, which was the post-apocalyptic musical with Tilda Swinton and Michael Shannon that also was bloated and overlong, worse than this movie for sure.
Yeah, I mean,
Like this movie is not bad, but the end is terrible. But it seems to be this. It's interesting to me. It reminded me also of whenever you'll see somebody who writes novels or prose be given a comic book that they're going to write a run on.
yeah.
And more often than not, it doesn't work for me because when you switch from one medium of storytelling to the other, the language, while it may have some similarities, it is different in some very like fundamental ways. And it made me wish that he had just made a documentary about the Nickel Academy. I think I would have been more emotionally invested seeing interviews and hearing about the actual people. And there are moments in this movie where he does use like documentary techniques.
Yeah. Especially when it's supposed to be that like the older Elwood is going through documents as to what had occurred.
Because in the present day, it's being reported on. And
Yes.
so it's sort of everything's coming out now.
Yes. I just it's a weird thing when it's just like first person perspective puts me so out
Well,
of the feeling about it, but I think it also has to do with the fact that the editing, like mind you, again, visually this movie is
in
beautiful.
terms of like lighting, framing,
Lighting,
yeah,
framing.
focus, it's a lot of great deep focus shots.
I kind of wish that at times if we're gonna go with quiet, then you stay with quiet. But it was almost as if like there was not a lot of trust in the actors to be able to portray certain emotions without speaking out loud or for someone to like be hinting as to what is going on verbally
It,
versus having like the moments that we should have felt icky versus sometimes they would just take advantage of the boys. And you're just like, and then there's like a hand on his shoulder, like rubbing a kid kind of thing.
I was thinking how it is PG-13.
Hmm.
And I have not read the book, though I feel like at some point I need to sit down and really work through a lot of Colson Whitehead's books because I've heard very good things. Uh, but I would imagine that in the books, because it's text and not images, he can describe things more without it unsettling the reader. And I got the sense you were talking about the performances. It felt like there was something being held back.
Hmm.
It did feel like this film was very scared of falling into the same space that what a lot of black torture porn has been lately.
Yeah.
Films of and TV shows of the last few years that have just basically made black suffering the centerpiece without any comment on it. And I feel like this had a comment, and it's not that I want to see these characters suffer, but I worry about audiences that see this and don't really get the full impact of how bad it really was. That
Yeah.
there's too much restraint at a certain
Yeah,
point.
it's like you almost needed something a la the way that like Scorsese at the end underlines with
Killers of the Flower Moon?
Killers of the Flower Moon of how like deeply this impacted when he does like the whole radio thing.
Yeah.
There should have been something that like indicated like how deep this impacted versus, oh, I see a buddy of mine in the bar. And when you come to think about like that, like afterwards, what's like the whole plot twist of that film, um, like they're talking about the like the Nickel Academy, but they're not really admitting the damage that's been done.
Yeah. It was the trauma that comes after felt too muted for me.
Yeah.
And so that's one way you could have been able to communicate what a horrific experience it was. We hint at it when they're children, but as adults, we see how they still carry it with them. And I didn't think the film communicated that well, that they
No,
were
because
carrying this suffering with
it
them
was
into their
like
adult
it's
years.
more like Elwood is doing research.
Well, and part of that is there's a twist in the third act.
Yeah.
And if you allowed us to feel more of the character's suffering, then that would give away the twist. And that really frustrated me because I would have just rather, instead of the gimmick of the first person and trying to, have this, interesting twist at the end, just a straightforward, well-written, well-acted movie about this
Yeah.
thing. I would have been fine with
Yeah,
that.
because I think about like on the Underground Railroad, like Barry Jenkins, who like did such a beautiful job. And I read the book after I
Mhm.
watched the series. And even reading the book, it is like yeah, they softened it a little bit in the feature of it. That was an Amazon Prime thing. But at the least, like when he was doing it, like you could feel that texture, but you could also feel the main character's abandonment by her mother.
When I think with the Underground Railroad, the miniseries, uh, what I liked about that was he still presented you with moments of true horror. He just was very smart and particular about where he put them. I think of the first episode and the burning of the slave, I think, who stole something.
Yeah.
And that's like a genuinely like horrifying sequence.
Yeah.
But he doesn't do that every episode. He figured out how to like pace the
And the
story.
same
Yeah.
way that like he was able to pace with them, like if Bill Street could talk, we didn't enjoy Bill Street could talk completely.
It was
But
yeah, the more I think about it, the more I like that movie though.
but the more time passes, the more appreciation you have for it because he did it so well. The balancing act of this tragic love story.
And that's also a film that shifts perspectives because we get Regina King, who goes off in kind of her story, the father in that film, the young couple, each of them, we kind of shift perspective. And I think of, and I can't remember the actor's name, but the gentleman who played Paperboy in Atlanta,
Mm-hmm.
his like one scene in Beale Street resonates with me still. And it's him talking about being in prison and I never needed to see what happened, but his performance, the way the scene was shot, the
And the
music
music.
conveyed everything I needed to feel about that. And that's what was missing in Nickel Boys is that's why I talked about if you had maybe done sort of afterwards and we got a sense of how they carried this with them, how it's something they can't get rid of. It's so embedded in them. That would, I think, have helped somewhat, and it would have made me feel more of a connection with these characters rather than this distance that the film is creating.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of warning of being like, well, Elwood, it could be worse. You could be like in hell, and which is supposed to be a hot box that they put them in, whereas like they're sweating a lot. Like it's more of a verbal, like, well, you could have been sexually assaulted, and it
And like
doesn't.
again, I don't want to see that happen to these characters, but I think the way the film does this technique of sort of these close-ups on things, I just feel like there was some way you could have used that to communicate the violation that
Well, I
was
think
happening
it's
to them or
almost like
something.
they were afraid to do it because moments of joy, they do it so
Yeah.
beautifully. The moments of curiosity, they do it great. Like I do love the shot of like Elwood looking down and there's a little girl like on the
Oh
benches
yeah, yeah.
crawling around. And or we get like these little snippets of Elwood in love and taking photos with this girl, but we also don't.
Well, and it's clear that so much thought and work went into uh storyboarding this film.
Yeah.
Um, but it made me think of another film. It was an A24 film that has not gotten much attention that I think deserves it that we saw early last year, which was All Dirt Roads Taste of Salt, which was written and directed by Raven Jackson. One of the connections that Nickel Boys has with that is they have the same cinematographer, Jomo
Yeah.
Frey. And I think I loved the cinematography of Nickel Boys. And then when I saw it with Jomo Frey, I thought, oh, this cinematographer has done a similar-ish story. It's not the same setting, but it is a film about perspective and time.
Yes.
And it's about a young woman and her complicated relationship with her mother and her sister. I think is there a sister in that story?
There's a sister, yeah.
And it jumps back and forth between, her childhood, her adolescence, her adulthood, and then eventually into her old age.
Yeah.
And it's about family trauma and not understanding why certain things happen when you were younger and then coming to understand them better later when you're older. In that film, I think I never felt distanced from that character. I felt like I was there with her in that movie in a way that Nickel Boys just couldn't ever get to. And that movie's much shorter than Nickel Boys,
And it
too.
is quieter and it
Yeah.
is like it kind of gets you in a chokehold afterwards when she starts talking about time with a younger relative of hers. Because then you start to realize you're going through her memories. You're going through something with her. And at first, like it's one of those films again that you might not appreciate it, but the more you think about it, the more you're just like, oh, that was done
And
beautifully.
it does a similar sort of disorientation like Nickel Boys, but playing with perspective. You'd mentioned earlier contemporary American acting styles, and that is something that is really bothering me lately. It was on a movie mindset hosted by Will Menaker, and I feel horrible that I can't remember her name, his co-host. They were talking about the Oscar films, and one of the things they said about the lineup for Best Picture nominees is that they almost all feel like fake movies.
Yeah, like a lot of them feel like they could have been music videos.
Because like I think The Substance is a movie that ironically I don't think it has much substance, but man, it's got a lot of style.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But with Nickel Boys, it was that acting piece that really made me feel weird. There were some performances I thought that were okay, like Fred Heschinger
Mhm.
as Harper. He's the younger white man who kind of has befriended Turner.
Yeah.
He's always pretty good. But then you have someone like Hamish Linklater as Spencer, who's one of the older men at Nickel Academy. Felt very like caricaturish and cartoonish.
Yeah.
He didn't feel like a real person. And that was the thing with so many of these characters is they didn't feel like real people to me
No.
because they're explicating things. They're saying things out loud and talking in a way that human beings don't speak that way. Like they just don't. Um, and to me, it feels like it's trying to communicate something very heavy to what it imagines are children in the audience. And based on literacy in America, that may be the right
Yeah,
take, right?
earlier I was thinking this felt as if like the rating was done as an excuse to be
So
like
like middle school
we
kids could
we're gonna
come.
go we're gonna have a field trip to go watch this movie because it's it's gonna be educational and like it's one of the one of those that just like that okay if you put this during class no one's gonna get in
Yeah.
trouble because you're talking about history and race
And
but who knows because of like how DEI is.
yeah, being vilified. I found a quote on a Letterboxd review, and I was like, "Yep, that gets it." And it was a film about institutional violence against black people shouldn't be this easy to shrug off once the credits roll. And
Yeah.
that, like, when this movie ended, it was like it just evaporated. It just went away. And I think that American media, especially things, because this was made by MGM, Amazon MGM Studios, so a very corporate production. I think they are terrified to present the truth of how black people have been treated. And so they provide us with a sort of Mickey Mouse Disney version of it, where it's more digestible. They're having to admit to some wrongs, but they're also like trying to shift and focus on, oh, this kindly grandmother, and oh, look what great friends they are. When you're like, but there's some really bad things happening in the background that I think maybe need to be in the forefront a little more.
Yeah.
Because I would think that, yeah, they walked away from this remembering the friendships they made with these other boys, but they also walked away with a lot of trauma about how they were encouraged to abuse each other
Yeah.
and also how they were abused by the people running the school. Um, so I think it's a different type of pandering than we used to get. If you go back to the 90s and you'd see anything talking about race, it was the most like pandering, we're colorblind nonsense. And so this is an improvement from that for
Yeah,
sure.
it's an improvement because we're not getting, young white reporter finds this awful stuff that happened to
Yes.
black people and is begging for the black people to speak in order to for the other white people to help. Like,
And so I think I didn't need this to be like explicitly brutally sadistic, but I also felt the horror should have been more affecting than it was. I also want to say I feel like there's an actor who, when I see his name in a movie, I and I didn't know he was in this movie until we started watching it. But as soon as I saw his name, I was like, "Oh, I'm not gonna like this movie." And that is Daveed Diggs. Now, I have not seen everything Daveed Diggs has been in. And it's probably because he is in Hamilton, which I think is one of the worst pieces of American propaganda in recent years, which nauseates me because it attempts to launder white supremacy using black faces and black talent.
and
Yeah.
Latinos and stuff.
And it's and so anytime I see Daveed Diggs in something, I immediately think, oh, this is going to be very neoliberal and it's going to dull the edges of everything about it. And I don't want, it's one of those where you're like, did I prime myself to feel that way? I don't think I did. I think this ended up being something that felt, because the co-writer with Ramel Ross is a white woman.
Yeah.
Uh, and I do wonder about how, and she's older, and I think she produced his documentary, so she's clearly a mentor figure to him. I do wonder how she influenced it. And I wonder if it had been only black writers, what the film would have been like.
And that's the thing. We're not ever going to be really
Yeah.
sure. We don't know also like the producer's notes. We don't know if it's supposed to be like, well, we want it to be a PG-13 rating, so we're going to stick with the PG rating. And wondering if you just added a touch of more, like just dread. What I'm asking for is dread. You don't have to show it.
Yes.
I just have to feel like
They
that I hurry up and get me back to when Elwood is an adult and is over this, or hurry up and show me like the grandmother, or hurry. It's I need to feel a certain dread because even when Elwood being as accepting as he is, when his grandmother is telling the story about what's going on with the lawyer and his appeal, we don't feel that upset stomach that we should feel.
Yes.
We just think, oh, Elwood is such a good grandson because he's taking it so well.
There is missing tension.
Yes.
Like at a certain point, there's like a little tension at the beginning, and then that breaks, and it never comes back
Because I think about,
until maybe like the very end of the movie.
yeah, and I think it's like it's kind of unfair, but it's the truth. I think about like like Barry Jenkins, like Moonlight, when the adult character finally talks to his mother, right? How he is not saying anything, but the heartbreak from her is enough to speak for them both.
Yeah. Or even in that movie as well, when he's a young boy and he confronts this man who's become a mentor figure to him, but is also a drug dealer in the community, about the fact that the man is the one who sold his mother the drugs.
Yeah.
And that, like Mahershala Ali, and I think it was Janelle Monáe,
Yeah.
do such, and the kid are so good in that scene.
Yeah.
And there was never, and I wanted that from this movie. I wanted those scenes, and the first person was so distracting and so distancing. I was thinking about how, for me, there's a big part of performance that is reaction,
Yeah,
and being able to see characters react off of each other. And when I'm inside one of the characters, I'm not being allowed to have that full back and forth.
I think I would have been okay with some of the shots not having been like straight to face to the person, because the one thing that confused me was when the perspective was changing between Turner and Elwood when they're sitting together eating. I'm looking at Elwood after I saw it from his perspective, quote unquote. He's looking down at his food.
Yeah, there was like technical errors in terms of where the eye line was
He's like
when we go
looking
back
down
and
to
see
his
the
food.
yeah.
He's being like, no, I just like, like, and I'm just like, that's not first perspective then.
Well, and then if like that's going to be what your movie is, that's your selling point, then you need to nail it.
Yeah, I would have been okay had said like in those scenes he was looking down, or because like then that way like the acting is highlighted a little bit. Have him mumble, have him like just do, it's just clear cut lines. And oh, Turner's the bad boy. Elwood is the one that's just gonna be the good boy.
When it's like I said again with the acting, it just feels like it was a movie that was talking down to its audience. If it was intended for adults, if it was intended for like a middle school crowd, then I think it'll work for that group.
And I think that was the aim, unfortunately.
When a police officer and his faithful police dog get injured in the line of duty, a harebrained but life-saving surgery fuses the two of them together, and Dogman is born. As Dogman learns to embrace his new identity, he must stop feline supervillain Petey the Cat from cloning himself and going on a crime spree. This is the Dogman. I'm sure you can tell that from the description. 2025 animated release based on the book series of the same name by Dave Pilkey, who also authored Captain Underpants. Now, my main question for you is Dogman propaganda.
Yes.
And what is your basis for that?
The cops are fine. That they're just
It is a very
great.
positive view of cops.
Yeah.
And I did see there's on Letterboxd, there's a lot of debate about if it was propaganda.
It is propaganda.
It frames the police as like good guys.
Yeah, whoever says it's not, they're a fucking liar. If they're just gonna like, but it's just cartoon for kids, still, kids are gonna think
Yeah.
that cops are cool.
Yeah. Like if you went back to Nazi Germany and they were doing things about, hey, it's Dogman, he's an SS officer. Like we'd be, that's bad. That's propaganda for kids. Same thing if you're doing about cops. Also, is this a body horror movie?
Ooh, yeah.
I think it's because if there is such a thing as horror comedy,
Yeah.
I think this is a body horror comedy.
Yeah, it is.
And it's not just Dogman. There's a lot of body horror throughout this movie. There's some fucked up shit. So I've never read Dogman. I have paged through the books.
Okay.
I have been aware of the dominance it has over the childhood zeitgeist for the last few years.
I'm surprised you haven't read it, considering the fact that like it probably was lingering in your classroom.
Well, they're comic books, they're graphic
Okay.
novels, so it's hard to do a read aloud of that unless you do it like on an overhead projector. I have read some Captain Underpants books, but even those were like came along when I was like in high school, so it was a little beyond
You were
me.
reading them in high school?
Well, no, I've well, thank you for joining us here on the Pop Culture Podcast.
Podcast going solo.
We're going on hiatus for a new format. No, I do believe I have read a Captain Underpants as part when I was doing my virtual teaching during COVID.
Okay.
Because everybody was on a computer screen and I had a digital copy of the book, so it made it a lot easier to do a read aloud with. You bitch. But my brother owned several of the books as a kid, so I was like aware of the gist of Captain Underpants. And have we watched Captain Underpants, the movie with our niece and nephew? I feel like I remember falling asleep watching Captain Underpants on our couch at our old house.
Yeah, I think I just ended up like I was cooking dinner at
Yeah,
some
and it was
point.
just like it was one of those just keep him busy.
Yeah.
So that's where we're not the target audience for Dogman.
No, unfortunately, we don't even have the target audience living in our house.
Yeah, why do we watch this movie? But this is an all-star cast, except for Dogman, though. It's the director of the film, Peter Hastings, is the voice, I believe, of Dogman in his human form as well. We've got Pete Davidson as Petey the Cat, Little Rel Howery as Chief, Stephen Root as Grandpa Cat. Sherry O'Terry, we're really stretching all-star when we say this, as the mayor. Melissa Villasenor as a realtor. And then noted Zionist and asshole Ricky Gervais as Flippy the Fish. And then Isla Fisher, soon to be ex-wife of a Zionist,
Yeah.
as Sarah Hadoff, who's like the local reporter. This is a continuation of, I think, a big sea change in American animation that started with the Spider-Verse film.
Yeah.
Where suddenly Western animation realized we don't all have to just follow Disney on everything, or the like ugliness of early Shrek. If you look at that, that we can be very creative and bold and mix art styles together. And so I will say that visually, this film captures the style and look of the books perfectly.
Yeah.
It has texture to it. Like it felt like you could reach in and pick these things up. They had weight to them. And so I think as like a little kid, that's a fun thing because it makes the world feel like it's real. There's like, it feels like, oh, that's like a little dog man doll running around kind of a thing. Very rich in detail. I think if there was like a coffee table book like The Art of Dogman, it would be a very interesting book to pour through.
Because even the lighting changes at some point when it's supposed to be like ideas or a montage. They at the least give it some type of different weight so you know that you're watching something different versus the present time.
Well, it's a very meta film.
Yes.
It is a film that is like making jokes with the children in the audience about this being a movie.
Yeah, it's making jokes, but also not being like to the point of like Shrek, right? Where it ages itself so badly if you ever watch the first one.
Yeah, this is more about structure than it is like pop culture reference or anything. Which is, I think, a trait from what I know of Captain Underpants, and I'm sure it's the same writer. So those books are very much about playing with the conventions of a book.
Yeah.
So like all these books have Flipperama, which will be a series of pages where if you flip them really fast, it gives like an animation effect. Or they'll play with flashbacks or foreshadowing or all the sort of literary
or like
tropes.
Wordplay, because it's like the main like machine here is like 88.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that. I saw someone refer to it as Simpsons for kids.
Yeah. Even though Simpsons was for kids at some point.
Simpsons was never for kids. It was watched by I don't know who Simpsons is for now. I think it's very fan servicey from what I gather, but in like a good way. In that this is like a reward for the loyal fans of Dogman.
Sorry, I just want like I just love the idea that they've struggled so hard. They've waited.
Well, no, it's like kids, we're finally brought Dogman to the big screen, and we're not.
Made you read
And we're
so
gonna.
many pages.
We are gonna fucking blow your asses off, kids. It's gonna be great. Uh, because I have a student that I work with who is a huge fan of Dogman. And watching this movie, I'm like, oh, he's gonna fucking love this. He's gonna fucking love this shit. This is his wheelhouse.
You should let him listen to this
I'll say,
podcast.
kid, you're gonna fucking love this movie.
The amount of cursing coming out of your mouth.
It's one of the most ADHD movies I've ever seen.
Yes.
It is so fast paced.
I mean, I do have ADHD. I thought it was a perfect face.
Yeah, I bet you did. I was like, could we pump the brakes for a minute? It is just from the minute the movie starts, it is relentless. No, it still manages to have heart.
Yeah.
And I appreciate, we'll talk about that in a bit. But like, god damn, this movie is fast. And I asked you, I was like, is this an iPad kid movie? And you were like, you don't quite think so.
No.
I think Minecraft, which
Minecraft
when that movie comes out, we're reviewing it on the podcast. We're doing it.
As someone who works with like kids who I've watched them get overstimulated by videos, there wasn't enough bright lights on this, and there wasn't any techno music. A lot of
Minecraft just looks like it is going to. It's the equivalent of eating all your Halloween candy on Halloween night.
Yeah.
It is gonna make you sick. You're gonna vomit. You're gonna be having a smile on your face the whole time, but it's just overstimulation. The one thing I was shocked to see in this movie were parallels with RoboCop.
Oh God, yeah, that was like.
And I made a joke.
Yes, we were like joking.
I want to set this up. So Dogman goes back to his human person's, I guess both of their homes. And there's, I think, a for sale sign outside. And I looked at you, I was like, oh, is this going to be like RoboCop where he goes inside and all of a sudden his memories of his kid and his wife and all that? And fucking Dogman goes in this fucking house and that's what happens. And I was like, this is insane. Yeah. And so... it's a movie that I've seen people going like, oh, there's a lot of jokes for adults. And I kind of don't like that in movies. I'm like, if you're going to make a kids movie, fucking make it for kids.
Yeah.
Just make it where adults, like, that's why when the Skibbity Toilet movie comes out, which is apparently going to be produced by Michael Bay, I hope that's a movie that does not attempt to appeal to adults. I want it to be incomprehensible to me. I want to watch it and review it on this podcast.
I want to watch it and know that now.
I don't know what the
has died.
And I want to go, I don't know what the fuck's going on.
Yeah, you're going to become like one of those people that only watches a certain media from a certain time because the new stuff just confuses
we're going to talk about that. I actually have some notes regarding that idea. We're kind of done that. This movie features a child character who literally uses the power of a robot named ADHD to save the day. So it's a movie that knows the kids who love this stuff, right? But despite the insanity of this movie and the fast pace, it does touch on really like deep themes.
Yeah.
Feeling like abandonment,
generational trauma.
Yeah, I was also thinking it almost had a Hamaguchian sense. Like when you think of evil does not exist.
Yeah.
Because in this movie, there is no evil character. No. Anybody that's an antagonist is ultimately shown to either misunderstand what's going on or be misunderstood or just they're caught up in the moment of something and they need someone to kind of like bring them back down to earth.
Yeah.
And so I really like that about it. I feel like I don't really like kids movies that set up a very binary, like a good evil dynamic.
I mean, like there is a very touching moment because like, so Petey the cat clones himself and he's talking to little Petey and he's like, I don't understand. You're the exact clone of me, but you're nothing like me. It's like, well, maybe the reason it's not that I'm not like you, maybe I'm just like you. As just being like basically like there's still that goodness.
Or like that Petey doesn't know himself fully.
Yes.
He's so caught up in like his anger that he's lost sense of like who he is.
Yeah, and so I do kind of like that the fact that this movie even though it could have been like, oh, Petey's dad is finally in the picture, the guy's gonna regret everything he's ever done and just come to terms and fix it. He does the same shit
he
again.
steals all Petey's stuff and drives away in a moving van.
And it's basically indicating it's up to Petey to change. It's not up to him to ask his dad to change.
Well, because his dad is like barely in the movie, so it's sort
Yeah.
of like all you're left with is yourself, and that's all you can like work on is yourself.
So deep, though.
And I feel like Pete Davidson gives a really good voice
Yeah,
acting performance.
I thought he was just gonna phone it in.
But he's like really committed to this role.
It's
Now
a-
it sounds like Pete Davidson,
Yeah, of
but
course.
there is emotion in the performance.
Yes.
And because Dogman just barks and woofs,
I think it's necessary.
Petey is like kind of the emotional center of the movie. Even though there is a lot of endearing things about Dogman through the
Yeah.
animation, that's where you kind of
Yes.
get his emotions. I did see critiques from parents whose kids read the books, and they said that the film does miss some of the humor and heart that's in the books. They felt like it was there was a little too much of a movie cynicism edge, which I could understand. Probably a lot in the pacing and the rapid fire jokes.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, when the books, kids are able to just kind of sit with a page and go back, and that makes the reading experience more enriching than this kind of like hyper light speed film version of it. It's harder to go back when you're watching a movie versus when you're looking at the book and you can turn back pages, reread them.
Yeah.
I would be very interested in getting a kid's take on this movie, particularly what they didn't like about it. Because it's a movie where I can already tell what kids are going to like about it.
Yeah.
Having been like a elementary school teacher for over a decade, I know what appeals to kids. But I'm always more interested about critiques kids can give something because they'll see things that you won't just basically because of
Being a fan.
chronological distance from it as an adult who's viewing media versus a kid viewing media. And as you said, they have read all the books. I haven't.
Yeah.
So their view of Dogman is different than my view of Dogman. So maybe at some point we can have a children's roundtable. No, I'm kidding. On this podcast. And go, what do you fucking kids think about the movie? I do think it's a really great film for a parent to catch a little nap in the theater while the kids are entertained because it's so fast. They're not going to have time to do anything else. The parents can just kind of set a little, turn your sound off on your phone.
Do a little vibrate.
Yeah, a little vibrate on the phone. A little 15, 20-minute cat nap in there, right in the middle. You're good. And so we were talking about aesthetics. So you were talking about the idea that I might only want to watch movies up to a certain period. And I thought about this. And I look at how aesthetics from my childhood have been folded into a lot of contemporary American movies for the worse. So think about the films of the 80s and 90s. And as a kid, there was this. We'll take Indiana Jones, for example.
Yeah.
As a kid, there's a magic to Indiana Jones. I can remember renting Last Crusade and watching it over and over the weekend that we had it. And it was like this, wow, like what an amazing, I'm going on this adventure with Indiana Jones. It appealed to me. And it's a movie that I still enjoy now. However, I look at Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and I watch it and I come to it with still having the same love for the old Indiana Jones movies. And I'm like, what? It just doesn't work. Maybe that's because, and then, I haven't even watched Dial of Destiny. Maybe at some point we'll do that for the podcast as a punishment for something. But it's just, maybe it's because that protagonist is so much older and I'm so much older that there's something about them trying to do it now that doesn't work.
I think one of the reasons is also we don't see Indiana Jones, the character, the decisions for him to change. Because it's almost as if like just being like, well, Indiana Jones is supposed to punch a Nazi, take out his gun instead of doing blah, 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 and always be cool. I wish to a certain point that it's like, okay, Indiana starts relying on different techniques in order to get away.
Now that he is octogenarian.
Yes, like, oh, like being like, oh no, like being like, oh, like using his old man stuff in order to hide something to get into like a train, or like have someone help him do something, but it turns out he fooled them because he made himself look like this meek old man.
So we take that, the
Hmm.
Indiana Jones idea. They make Tomb Raider movies.
Yeah,
You can't make a Tomb Raider movie without having to have it comment in some way on Indiana Jones.
yeah.
That Uncharted movie that came out a few years ago with Tom Holland and Mark
Mark Wahlberg.
Wahlberg. Uh,
That
uh,
felt weird just
Mark
looking
Mark
at
Wahlberg. There's a whole cult in Boston that does that every day. They look into each other's eyes and go, Mark.
Mark Wahlberg.
No, they got Mark Wahlberg. Uh, so these are trying to also be Indiana Jones, right? You can't make a movie about a globetrotting archaeological type investigator and it not be Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
And none of them work, but they just keep doing it because it's an archetype that is so locked in at this point, but it's not an archetype that is being dissected in any interesting ways.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what I worry about with any children's media. There's a new Shrek movie that's going to be coming out, I think, this year. Shrek 5. And it's just sort of why? Because who is this movie going to be for? Is it for the Zoomers that are all now adults? Or is it for children? And so this movie, Dogman, is very clearly for a child audience. Like, there's no doubt. But 20 years from now, is there going to be some movie like Dogman where they're trying to appeal to kids that loved Dogman when they were little and now they're adults and it just doesn't work?
Probably, but I think with with Shrek, it's a little bit more confusing because how the fuck are you gonna have Zendaya, who was in Challengers, like this and like this movie?
I would say
like
most kids probably aren't aware of Challenge.
like this movie, but that she's doing like these really incredible like adult movies like Dune and Challengers to just be like, well, she's gonna play Shrek's daughter.
Well, it's because she's going to make a bunch of money. That's why she's doing
A ton of money, but it just like it doesn't make any sense. It's just tossing money and hoping to make a ton of money back.
And so a kid watching this movie now, just laughing their ass off till they pee in the movie theater, I love it. It's great. But I do worry because I see how my own generation is no longer being intellectually stimulated by most movies. Because what we do is we just make children's movies for adults now instead of making adult movies for adults.
I think it's too much of now you have a kid and you're gonna introduce them to what you liked. And
But it's like I can because those old movies exist.
and
Why don't we make new movies now?
but instead of doing like a whole new media kind of thing, and I think like Dogman it's kind of refreshing because it wasn't from my childhood. Now I won't be surprised if in like 10 to 15 years they're kind of like, okay, now you guys had kids.
But here's the thing I'm worried about is I don't want there be movies made for adults that feel like Dogman. That would like break my fucking heart. And I feel like we're already kind of getting there where it's just this the cutting of the movie is so fast and so overstimulating that there's no way you can tell a like coherent story. This works because it's a very simple story, right?
Yeah.
But if you're trying to tell a story for a more mature audience, but it's a film made in the style of something that might appeal to an iPad kid, like I can't even like comprehend what that would be like. Yet at the same time, I think back to how we watch a lot of old films, silent films.
Yeah.
And their pacing is much slower than movies even from like 40 years ago, right? 50 years ago. And so is there this kind of speeding up of the film medium? Is that something that's happening where movies are happening like at a faster pace in terms of the way stories are told? And so this movie, Dogman's an hour and 34 minutes, but there is so much in this movie.
Yeah.
There's like 3 or 4 movies in this movie.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's just a lot to like, especially when as media and illiterate and as like just, textually illiterate as most Americans are.
I mean, this isn't surprising because that's what they do with Marvel films. I feel like what they do is like, oh, there's a run that we want to base this on. We have 2 hours. Let's put everything in there and then sprinkle some original storylines that are really going to piss off the original comic book readers that they're going to be like, where the fuck is Iron Man his
Well,
mentor?
I mean, you bring that up, and I was thinking because I just recently read Frank Miller's Daredevil run this year, back to the 2003, 2004 Ben Affleck Daredevil movie,
Yeah.
and how it was trying, like, even back then, they were trying to cram way too much into a movie, but everybody was kind of like, oh, that's bad, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
I don't think they would say that now. Though,
I think they would still stay that. I think
I guess Madam Web,
yeah,
which
because
is
the
kind
thing
of something like that.
the thing is for this one, I understand why they went that route because it was kind of like this is probably going to be the one time that we're going to do this. If we get really lucky, we'll get a second film or we're going to adapt something else.
Well, I mean, I do wonder about the Sonic the Hedgehog movies, what those are like.
I mean, again, we don't really sit down. I think it's also this weird thing that we have to remember like, yes, there are certain films that are going to be fast, but we watched The Brutalist. Was that fast?
Didn't feel like its runtime.
No, it didn't. And like there are other movies that we've watched that don't have this, shove it into your fucking brain. I think with kids, it's a little bit more worrisome. And I understand because I've seen people be like, well, my kids only watch films from the early 2000s and 90s, and they have less like tantrums because it's not so overstimulating. And I can get that, but I'm also sort of like, well, how much fucking iPad time are you giving them like beyond just movies?
Well, and I mean, Dogma doesn't worry me so much as something like Black Adam.
Yeah,
That
Black Adam was like fucking
that
gross.
movie felt like it was made for the dumbest person in the theater.
But like it didn't get a fucking
And
sequel.
I mean, that's, I guess, a good thing. It killed the DC universe.
It really fucking did. Like they just brought in what like Tim Gunn and they're like
Tim Gunn
what I don't know.
from Project Runway?
Yeah, that guy.
James Gunn.
James Gunn and I was like and it's gonna take a bit before we actually see what unfolds from him.
Though from the Superman trailer, there are some things in there that I'm a little, I don't know. And there's a lot in that movie. Uh, However, when Minecraft is available for us to watch, we will be watching and reviewing it for this podcast.
And if you know any 10 or 11-year-olds that want to be in this podcast to review,
And share their fucking opinions about fucking Dogman. Would you recommend Dogman to our audience?
if you want something mindless, go for it.
Yeah, like we were saying, there's a lot of positives in this movie.
Yeah.
It's just a very overstimulating movie, and if you don't like the way you feel when you get overstimulated, then avoid this movie because I don't think you're gonna like it. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pop Cult Podcast. Make sure to check out our show notes for important links, including to our website, popcult.blog. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to be notified when new episodes are up wherever it is you listen to your podcasts. If you visit popcult.blog right now, you're going to find a lot more reviews. And because it's now March, we've started a new film series titled 13 Countries, 13 Films. So over on the website Letterboxd, if you pay the $12 a year fee to be a pro member, you get a bunch of stats. And one of those is a world map that highlights countries that you've seen movies from. And I decided in all my autistic glory that I was going to go through on every country I had not seen a movie from and compile a list. And so there's probably over 100, maybe. It's close to that. And of course, it's the kind of places you would expect there to be a deficit simply because we don't hear a lot about movies from these places. A lot of areas in Asia outside of Southeast Asia, Africa especially, we don't hear a lot about their films, and some places in Central and South America and the Caribbean. So for March, we're going to be watching 13 of those films. This week, I'll be putting up reviews for Sama, which is from Syria, The Message, a Libyan film, and I Am Not a Witch, which is from Zambia. If you enjoy what we do here on the podcast and over on the website, we'd encourage you to support us on Patreon. We have several different tiers for you to pick from, depending on what you're comfortable spending. I want to thank our current patron, Matt, who donates at the writer's room level. At that level, he gets to pick a movie every month for me to watch and review. And he's been picking some pretty good ones lately. He picked the Academy Award winner, Anora, a few months back. We also have patron exclusive podcasts that we've done a few mini series that are over there for you to be able to listen to. Right now, we're working on a series, a director spotlight for Ryosuke Hamaguchi, Japanese director. And the first episode of that will probably be up next week as a free preview here in the regular podcast feed. On our next episode of the Pop Cult Podcast, we will be watching and reviewing the Iranian film The Seed of the Sacred Fig, as well as Pedro Almodovar's English language debut, The Room Next Door. Until next time, you keep listening, we'll keep watching. Our podcast music was provided by thepodcasthost.com and Alitu, the podcast maker. Find your own free podcast music over at thepodcasthost.com/free music.